with a grin, risking hair and skin. If we're behind, then never mind, we'll fight and win, for we're from Tigerland. We never weak until the final siren's gone. Like the tiger of old, we're strong and we're bold, for we're from Tiger, yellow and black, we're from Tigerland.
And welcome to another episode of Lily High on Life with a special guest, Michael Naphtali. Michael, welcome and thank you for that opening song.
Thank you. It's an important song, important in our life.
Well, I was surprised when I saw it as one of your favourites, and I'm assuming it holds wonderful memories for you.
Yeah, well, wonderful and sad. I sometimes do wonder why I can get so excited and so upset, so emotional about a bunch of men running around chasing a ball who happen to be wearing these set of colours rather than that, but I do. I think one of my earliest memories is with my uncle Phil, who is responsible for me and all our family barracking for Richmond, because when I was born he was about 20 years old, and he convinced me, touched to the chagrin of my late father, who had been born and grown up in Carlton, that we should be Richmond supporters. I do remember going to the old South Melbourne football ground with him. It must have been a public holiday, and Richmond, who was not very good but okay, was playing South Melbourne, who were the bottom, and we were definitely going to win. I was 7 or 8 years old. I remember we lost, and I remember crying. It was a very sad memory, and
you stuck with them anyway.
Echoed some years later. Our oldest son and his wife and 3 children live in Hong Kong. Don't see many games of football, but when they were here a few years ago, Elijah, their oldest, who was about 8 at the time, Richmond was playing Fremantle. They were ahead all day, lost, and he lay on the floor and cried. And I couldn't really work out whether I was happy that he was crying because he was so intense about football, or sad for him. But did bring back that memory. Did
you tell him about your crying episode?
I did. And the other great memory is a couple of years ago, 2017, we were actually in Hong Kong on our way to Israel. The grand final, which Richmond won, was on Yom Kippur. And in a sense it was good, because when we got home from shul we had no idea. We had a total press blackout and we watched it as if live. So that was a great high, again with children, grandchildren. So it's almost a religious experience in a way.
It is. I have a lot of religious friends who have experienced their teams winning or losing in the same way on a grand final.
I've got some very, very, very observant friends who on that day told me that because if you leave in Melbourne, if you walk through the streets, you're going to know who won. So they didn't, after Musaf, they didn't go back to shul, and they davened at home by themselves, so they didn't see anything in the street, and then as soon as Yom Kippur was out, they could watch it and not know the results. So yeah, it generates a lot of intensity, a lot of intense thought.
And a lot of emotion, which is lovely too. Now, for those people out there that don't know Michael Naphtali or have never heard of Michael Naphtali, as you know, I don't just have people on this program and interview them because they've done wonderful and amazing things for others or in their lives or careers. Now, Michael has done all of that. He's been extremely successful from humble beginnings as well, but has made a really big difference, not just in the Jewish community, but in Australia at large and overseas. He's helped a lot of companies. He's been in the financial arena, and he's been able to do some really amazing things. But the reason I've invited Michael on for this interview is because even though he's managed to achieve so much, he's still a really good, down-to-earth guy, what we would call a mensch. He's somebody that you can relate to, somebody who you can talk to, somebody who's had ups and downs, but who's basically a very high-on-life person.
I just worked out why I came on this program. That's just wonderful. I guess it's almost like being at your own funeral. It was fantastic.
Well, you see, there are so many people out there who don't think enough of themselves. And I think even with your accomplishments, you may have a little bit of that syndrome as well, in that people need to celebrate themselves. So that's what you're here for. Tell me about the Ark Synagogue that you and another great friend of mine, David Mandel, started together. How did all of that happen?
Well, first of all, I won't get out of here alive if I don't say there are actually three of us.
Okay.
Lionel Krongold, who many people do know, well known in the community, David Mandel and I. And it's actually the Ark Centre, where the concept is to have a centre with a shul in the middle.
But why was it your responsibility to do this?
There's a few reasons. I just want to go back, if I may.
Please.
You talked about humble beginnings, and we didn't grow up with a lot, but one of the things I think I actually learnt from the initial rabbi at the Ark Centre, Schneer Wax, talking to people who said they're atheists, they don't believe in God. His response was, that's a bit hard to have a serious debate about it, there is or isn't a God, but just think about the three main things that impact on your life: where you're born, when you're born, and to whom you're born. And if you don't get at least two of those right, you're really going to struggle. And you can be born in the wrong place, perhaps in Russia, but it's a good time, good parents. If you get all three right, as I did, it's the jackpot. So while the beginnings weren't particularly lavish in terms of, we weren't poor, but we weren't particularly wealthy, born the right time, born the right place, and born to loving, positive parents. And I think in many ways that's the best background you can have.
What was your parents' background in terms of where
I'm many generations Australian. Three of my grandparents were born in Australia. The other one was born in New Zealand. His mother was born in New Zealand. 6 of my 8 great-grandparents were born either Australia or England, and 2 from Europe, but they came here in the 1870s and 80s, so very, very Anglo background.
Right.
So just remembering the question was about the Ark Centre, which I'm very happy to talk about. That group of us, and it wasn't only the three of us, but we were the three, Lionel, David and I were the main instigators, realised, and we all had been for many years at Kew, grown up in Kew, lived in Kew, been near Kew, and the community was moving, and that synagogue was dying. It still limps along, but it's got a very small catchment area, and it's not a very profound thought to think that you put a shul, a Jewish centre, where Jews live, not where they don't live. And around the Ark, which is around Bialik, and we're contiguous with Bialik, there are a lot of Jewish people. And it's actually in many areas, and in that area, as densely settled as, what the Borscht Belt, the ghetto as it's called. But they are not people, from the nature of where they live and going to Bialik and so on, who are strictly observant, regularly observant. And they're people who, obviously because they live in the area, because they're going to Bialik, are interested in being Jewish, but not necessarily in the normal, davening every day and normal Shabbos and Yontovs. They weren't Mizrahi people. They weren't mainstream Orthodox people. But there's a good saying I heard from somebody once that the shul they didn't go to had to be an Orthodox shul. So we are obviously in the extreme of Orthodoxy. Those people who've been there will know it's men and women sit on the same level. There's a mechitza. It's not a very high mechitza. But we felt that there was a need, and we've fortunately been justified, like any startup. And my other great passion in life at the moment is my son Paul's venture capital startup. I'll get onto that. But like any startup, we have our ups and downs. Friday nights are usually very strong. And one of the great things that Lionel and David talk about is that there's 70, 80, 100 people there of whom, if there wasn't for the Ark Centre, maybe a handful would go to shul on a Friday night. The other great thing is in the late days at Kew, we were the youngsters. Now we're far the oldest in the room. So it's filling a need, and it's Shabbos mornings are not as much, Yontovs are bigger, and Tisha B'Av we had I think 50 or 60 on for Tikkun Leil. On morning there were even more. Shavuot yes. was big. So in Tisha B'Av we had a lot of people. So it's developing.
And if I could just say that it really is such a welcoming shul. We've had the rabbi on a number of times. Once to talk about the shul itself, once as to talk about the musical accomplishments of the choir, and it's a very welcoming shul. shul. I've gone there on my own, thinking that I'd see you or David there. If I went on my own, it would be fine. And even times when you guys weren't there, I just really felt welcomed by the rabbi, the rebbets, and other people there. So it's just one of those nice places.
Thank you, Lily. We certainly hope so. And you wouldn't expect me to say anything else than I don't know how many people are listening, but you're all welcome. We'd like to welcome more people regularly, and it's enjoyable. It has its ups and downs.
And the service on Fridays is always at 6 o'clock.
Always at 6 o'clock. In the summer, we can't bring in Shabbos. Winter, but it's the ideal time. And unlike many congregations, we start about 5:45, and we don't necessarily put a lot of emphasis for many of the people. I shouldn't say this on the davening. Of course, we do the Shabbos, Kabbalat Shabbat, but we do put a lot of emphasis on eating and drinking.
Yes, you've got your own chef.
We have our own chef who is outstanding and does catering for anyone who's interested in that too.
You understand the Jewish people. This is a good thing.
Well, when we started, that was one of the things that Schneer Wax, who was the rabbi and is still involved in the music, as you just said, he said, what do people want? People go out all the time. Where do they go? They go out to meet their friends, for food, for drink, for music. So let's replicate that in a Jewish environment. And that's, in essence, what the Ark is. And
I love the fact that the three of you saw a need, and instead of just talking about it, instead of kvetching about it, you actually went about actually doing something about it. Now, you retired earlier this year.
No, I didn't. I
was getting to the but. Tell us about this wonderful company and how your sons have made you proud, and how you now work with them.
What in terms of background, my partner and I started a company about 1997, and about 10 or 11 years later we sold it to Credit Suisse, and in June 30 this year I retired from Credit Suisse, having stayed on for all that time. But I'm still on a bunch of private company boards, obviously not for profit work. So when people talk about retired, I just gave up one of the many things I do. The thing I'm spending a lot of the time on now is with our second son, Paul, who has a venture capital fund, Rampersand. If you haven't invested, you should. It's not too late.
Give us the website.
Rampersand, www.rampersand.
Yeah, no, you've got to spell it out.
Rampersand. It's like ampersand with an R in front. And I'm enjoying it. It's all in internet communications technology. I don't understand any of it. I've learnt a lot. I understand something about the structuring and the deal doing, and it's just enjoyable. One of the great things, I've spent a life in family business. Some work when it works well, it's the best. But as you know from many terrible stories over many years in many countries, it sometimes doesn't. One of the great benefits I've got is working with my son in a situation where it's never, son, in the good old days when I ran it, I was so much better, because I didn't. It's his business. I'm always delighted when he asks me some advice, and I'm learning a lot. So it's
Are they different
good. Issues?
Are there different challenges with what you were doing, with what he's finding?
In essence, not. This is going to sound very motherhood, and forgive me for sounding a bit lecturing, but all forms of human endeavour are the same. Profit, start-up, early stage, late stage, social, families. It's about getting a bunch of people to work harmoniously together for the common good. Now, that sounds very basic, but it's true. And if you think of anything that you do, that's about what it is. In business, in large companies, they're different to small companies, but in essence, it's the same issue. How do you get an alignment of interests, that people work for the common good? When issues arise, how do you resolve them respectfully? One of my favourite sayings is it's important to be honest, but you don't have to be brutally honest. You can be sensitively honest. You can say, that looks terrible, or you can say, it looks a bit better if you wore a blue dress, not a green dress. You can say the same thing. You just don't have to be brutal. So it's always the same. Family, business, large business, small business.
From being brutal?
No. I've seen people be brutal. No, I think it's probably one of the things my mother, who is the most positive person I've ever met, I've often said, people talk about glasses being half full, and it didn't need to be anything in the glass for my mother to be terribly positive.
And she's still with you.
She's 95. She's getting older, naturally, but she's good and positive and still grateful for every day. So I think I learned a lot from that. So I'm sure I've done. Look, we've all done things we're ashamed of. Yes, I've been harsher than I should have at times, but in essence, I learnt from her and from a lot of positive experience. It's much better to encourage the carrot rather than the stick type comment.
Michael, what did it feel like for you or inside when you realised that your son was going into a similar field or a similar business?
Well, my oldest son did law and has always been very much involved in a similar area of activity, and all the kids while they were students worked with me. And it's delightful to see them start their own businesses. David, it's interesting, going off on a tangent in Hong Kong at the moment. And he and his wife and their 3 children will be coming back probably in the next 18 months. They're building not far from the Arts Centre. But obviously Hong Kong's in a very difficult situation. But he started his own business, a trustee business, having a law background. And it is a delight that they follow similar things, but very different. Very, very different approaches to the world. The whole point about complementary skills.
And your
they
daughter?
do work together. And our daughter, who turned 40 yesterday, I'm sure she's listening. Happy birthday, Lisa.
Happy birthday, Lisa.
And she's the general manager of the Arts Centre, which it's actually interesting that Lily, initially a number of people thought the appointment was because of nepotism. And they very quickly realised it wasn't, and she, obviously together with Schneer and Lisa and now Mushka and Gabby, the rabbis and the Rebbits have, but she's been very, very heavily responsible for the success, and Lionel and David and I lean on her very heavily.
So do you regularly come in and help Paul, or is it he gives you a call when he needs you sort of thing?
So the real answer to that question is yes. I go, now I don't have an office in the city, and he's in Cremorne, which is a very trendy area. I didn't realise how trendy I'd become going there and not putting on tie and so on. I spend a reasonable amount of time there, but yes, it's the greatest delight when he calls and asks me for advice. It's fantastic.
Michael, you, when you started out, you worked for a bank, you worked for the Pratt organisation, you were in jobs, and then you went out on your own and did consulting. What's the biggest difference? Was that something that was planned, or did all of that happen organically?
Yeah, it's interesting.
How do you switch from a job to your own business?
I was very fortunate in that after, I think it was 16 or 17 years with working closely with Richard Pratt, we reached an agreement that I'd spend half my time working for him and half doing other things, and I didn't know what that would be. And I was very fortunate I had the world's best salesman as the marketing manager, who was Richard, saying, if anyone come and talk to me about an issue, I'll go and talk to Michael. And people thought, Pratt was doing well, and I must have had some influence. And so I gathered this business. So I didn't ever really make the decision to go out and start something. He, in a sense, underwrote by paying me half what I was getting paid anyway, and the other things developed.
So he cut your salary in half and forced you to go out on
No, it was by agreement. In fact, it was time. I think one of the things, and it's true of communal organisations, which we might come back to later if there's time, that people stay doing the same thing too long. And they see themselves and the organisations as one when they're not. The organisation, particularly communal organisations, have a communal responsibility in succession planning, which is spoken about a great deal but often isn't practiced, needs a lot more focus. But anyway, so it was time. We reached agreement, and so half the time, half the salary, and that worked out well. Along the way, I met David Beattie, who was a partner at Arthur Andersen, and he was in the process of leaving Arthur Andersen before it imploded, and we just drifted into having a small corporate advisory business, and all of a sudden we had a lot of work, and then all of a sudden Credit Suisse wanted to buy it, and here we are. Just the interesting thing about David Beattie is I hadn't known David. I met him, and what I realised after a while is that although he's quite an observant Catholic, a very large proportion of his clients were Jews. I often said he'd been to more bar mitzvahs than I had. But we were talking about a particular investment opportunity one day, and he said, who are we going to take it to? And he listed all these people. I said, you haven't got any Gentiles on the list. He said, no, I don't really deal with Gentiles. So I often said the only difference between David and me was I do deal with Gentiles. He didn't. It was amazing. And we still remain friends and in some senses partners story. To this day. He's a wonderful man.
Michael, one of the underlying reasons for this program too, and the way I try to interview you, or the things I'm asking you, is because there are so many people who have been doing the same thing over and over again, getting the same results over and over again, and yet it's not bad enough. They'll complain, but it's not bad enough to do something different. So seeing that people have made changes and those changes have been positive is a good thing.
Oh, absolutely. I think, as I said before, there's too many communal organisations where I think people stay too long. In fact, David and Lionel and I are keen. It's nearly 10 years since ARC started. We're still interested, involved in every which way, but we've got a much more active board now. We've got more people doing things, handing over responsibilities. It's important. I see it. It's a different point, but when our son David, who lives in Hong Kong, was talking about this the other day, that people in Hong Kong are facing this same situation. They've been doing the same thing and hoping that nothing bad would happen. Clearly, bad things are happening. People tend to wait too long, and there's obviously terrible examples of the Holocaust always springs to mind in this context, but terrible examples of people just, as you say, they do the same thing every day and hope that by doing it somehow they'll get a different result, and they don't. So it is important. It's, I think, and you see it in the venture capital area. These are people who've thought of new ways of doing things, and the saying that the biggest transport company in the world doesn't have any cars, Uber, and the biggest accommodation, Airbnb, doesn't own any hotel rooms. So there's doing different things in different ways is the key to progress, and obviously in medicine. So it's obviously important. Discomforting, but it's very important.
The tagline for the show is "Change your attitude, change your life," and it's the way you look at things that really goes.
It is true. We all know the story. Two people looking at the same thing, seeing completely different things. Absolutely.
So, Credit Suisse came to you
yes.
and offered to buy your business.
Yes.
Gosh, what did you come home and tell your wife when that happened?
I don't remember exactly, but I do remember they walked in. Credit Suisse is in its essence a private bank and a wonderful private bank, and really understands a large international bank, understands private banking, which Australian institutions, I think I can say, with the possible exception of Macquarie Bank, really don't understand. And they hadn't been a private bank in Australia, had an investment banking presence, and they looked around and thought, how do we grow it more quickly than just hiring a few people? And they thought, because of our practice.
Well, it's a great compliment to you and David, your partner and David. How did it was just nothing. What did that feel like, and how did it change your life?
It changed. Well, the first thing.
And was it a definite yes?
It was a definite yes. They came to see us in 2008 and we sold in 2009, might be a year out, 2007. We actually sold 3 or 4 months before the GFC. A masterpiece of brilliant timing. I'd like to say it was great foresight. It wasn't really, but we'd had good years, and biblically 7 fat years, 7 lean. We knew that things wouldn't continue to be so good forever. We didn't have any idea of how bad things would become. But it was quite clear within 6 or 8 months our business, like any other business in that area, was unsaleable. So we knew the time was right. Timing is the most important thing, which is, of all the many Richard Pratt sayings, my favourite one. Timing isn't the most important thing, it's the only thing. And the other thing is it's a fundamentally different. You asked before about your own business. I mean, there you're responsible for the people, you're responsible for the financiers. So I think for the first 3 months after we sold, I slept 8 or 10 hours a day. All the tension flowed out. It was just a very different experience.
Was it so it was stressful before?
I didn't realise it was stressful. It's only it's like when you are stressed, you don't actually necessarily realise it. Yeah. Once it goes, then you realise it.
Yeah. So what was that feeling of releasing stress? Because that's big for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Like once you made the sale, it had gone through, you were sleeping better. How did that change your attitude to life, not just to business, but to life generally?
I don't know that it did. We were still locked in for 3 years on and out, so it wasn't a complete 180-degree change. I guess it gave more time. It's probably not a coincidence that it was around that time that we started the ARC Centre, or started to think about starting the ARC Centre, which I hadn't thought about that before, but it's probably relevant. I had more time and emotion to put into it. Lionel sold a business around that time, so it was relevant. And
your dad was still around?
No, Dad died in 1990.
Okay. So he got to see a lot of your success. Yeah. But
no, my father-in-law's more of an influence on that. Actually, my involvement with the JNF began, I remember it was Kol Nidre in 1993, I think. Something had happened, and he said, well, you're going to have more time now, you better get involved with the JNF. It was Kol Nidre. I was standing short next to my father-in-law, who had been the Federal Treasurer, I think at the time still the Federal Treasurer. So he was, almost to the day he died, used to come to ARC on Shabbos morning. So he saw a lot of that. But Dad, it's a tragedy that he basically got very, very ill, had a major stroke a week or so before David, our oldest son's bar mitzvah. So one of the joys, and I think about this a lot, is all the things that my mother has seen, all the weddings and bar mitzvahs and great-grandchildren.
A week before your bar mitzvah.
So he was... He was, and he didn't ever recover. So he was. He didn't see any of that, but thank God Mum did. Mum continues to.
Yes, let's play another piece of music here, which is really appropriate as we're talking about your dad.
Precious teaching do I give you, never forsake my Torah. It is a tree of life for those who grasp it, and all who uphold it are blessed. Its ways are pleasantness, and its paths are peace. Help us turn to you, and we shall return. Renew our lives as in days of old.
Al
And welcome back to Lily High on Life with Michael Naphtali. Michael, that's a beautiful piece of music. Do you want to tell us a little more about it and why you chose it?
It's obviously fundamental to every Yontov, but every Shabbos morning service. I think it's a nice piece of music. It's visually interesting in that it's sung while the Torah is being returned. So the Torah's there, the Oak is opened. In most shuls, there's the silverware. It's quite elaborate, and the basic teaching is the essence, or part of the essence of Judaism. It's not so much two aspects: the tree of life, the strength, and it talks about the paths of righteousness. So it's not a stagnant thing; it's the path. The pleasant paths, the path of righteousness, paths of peace. And I think, in essence, those two elements of Judaism are important. The history, we read from the same Torah for 3,000 years. And if you don't know where you came from, you don't know who you are, you don't really have a compass as to where you're going. But it is. So that's the first element. It's the core. But it does. That piece of music talks about the paths. It's not static. It's not that it's there. And I know this is a very deep topic, and there are some who wouldn't particularly relate to it in this way. But I think the fact that it talks about the paths is a very important message, a very important fundamental point of Judaism. We do some very different things. We have different attitudes. The Torah was, in its time, the most advanced social document. Even the slaves had a day off a week. Women had rights. Compare it to those tribal areas today. So it was a very advanced social document. Our job is to keep advancing and keep having that sort of attitude.
Have you become a little more observant, a little more reflective as you've gotten older? And was there also a change once you lost your father?
The answer to the last question is not really, not a fundamental change. It's been a slow drift. Yes, I have become more observant. I think part of it, there's that saying about it's not that the Jews kept Shabbat, Shabbat kept the Jews. 20-odd years ago, when I started to turn off my phone, not read emails, not do any work for, from Shabbos, for 25 hours. It really was. It's very relaxing. It's
what led to that commitment? What was there?
I don't know that there was an event. I think it was a drift. The boys' bar mitzvahs. I enjoyed that break. Went to shul with them, and they're 17 months apart. So it was really a continuous process for 3 years, and I found I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the break. I used to say, the break's good. Sometimes I sit in shul, sometimes I daven, sometimes I think, sometimes I daydream. But the fact is, it was a break, and it was just, and that break. And I think you said before, when you asked about people just doing the same things and doing, you do need to have a break. You need to have that reflective time, and if you're constantly doing, you're not thinking.
Michael, do you think that part of it is also, at that time, you started to feel comfortable in terms of safe and comfortable financially, as well as within your relationships, and that gave you that extra dimension to just breathe and take on this spirituality?
I don't know how to answer the question. I could sort of ramble a lot and not make a lot of sense. I don't know. I can't.
Let me tell you the reason I ask.
One-to-one relationships. This happened, therefore that. I don't think it was any one thing. It was a series of things. It was relationships. I don't think financial had a lot to do with it. Maybe it did, but I just don't think it's a cap happened and therefore be followed. I don't think it's.
The reason I ask is because I have more than a handful of friends who have done the same thing. They've never been religious. They've even grown up in a no shul at all or a reformed synagogue, and they've sort of become more not so much religious, but just more reflective in their lives. They find a certain amount of peace and tranquility and something that they don't have in other places. But and so they've taken on Shabbat, as you say, where they actually walk to synagogue. They don't listen. They don't turn on TVs and electronic things. And it's a kind of peace. But it also requires a peace of mind where you're in a relationship that you're happy with. And I've only just met your wife, who seems just lovely.
Well, we're getting to know each other. It's 49 years next week.
Oh, gosh, 49, Mazel Tov. Mazel Tov. That really is huge.
I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting thought. I don't really know how to respond to it. I don't know. And as I say, I don't think it's a one-to-one thing. I would make the distinction, and you talked about religion, you talked about observance, and I think you said it right. And actually, Rabbi Riskin, who I've been fortunate enough, the chief rabbi of Efrat, who is, I think it's fair to say, a giant of modern orthodoxy, I've been fortunate enough to spend some time with, has made the point that he knows some very, very observant people that he doesn't think are very religious, and he knows some very, very religious people who don't observe a great deal at all. And you need to make that distinction.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I have become more observant. Have I become more religious? Yeah, I don't know.
No, but it's that peace and respect for the religion you were born into that is the most important.
Yes.
And so in your home, as you were growing up, you weren't religious.
We always had Kiddush on Friday night. My parents didn't keep kosher. My grandparents, aunt and uncle, we were very close to. All the Yom Tovim, not shul regularly.
Michael, if I
but
could
I do have very orthodox forebears, so maybe it's something in the DNA.
I think it's in the DNA somewhere. I definitely do. And sometimes non-Jews are so Jewish because I believe there's a DNA component where it skips generations also. It's really easy to celebrate and be upbeat when things are going well and you have many, many milestones. You've helped so many businesses. You've helped create businesses. And I did want to spend some time on that, but we're not going to have time to actually take some examples that I was going to ask you about. But where I would like to go in the time we've got left is, how do you deal with and how do you cope with things that are not that great? You know, sort of health issues with people that are close to you when those sorts of things happen. What is it that gets you through those? What are your feelings?
Well, my wife would certainly attest to the fact I'm a great worrier. So when it's a problem for health, it's obviously not something you can do a great deal about, but I certainly worry the problem to death, actually, to keep thinking about it. I haven't traditionally handled stress, and stress is whatever you make of it, terribly well. Sleepless nights, that's got better as I've got older because the stress is less.
How do you cope with not being able to sleep? Because I know that's an issue for a lot of people.
Badly. I think I can cope with anything if I've had enough sleep and almost nothing if I haven't.
So I tell my mother, when you can't sleep, think about what you would like to happen, project into the future at what you would like. And she said, you live in fantasy land. I can't live in fantasy land.
I think it's important. I mean, when you talk about growing businesses and changing things, I think fantasy is important because it's using your imagination to think of things that no one else has ever thought of that creates those things and makes the progress. But I think it's actually, you can't solve a problem without intense focus, other than good luck, and that doesn't happen that often. The other thing to remember, it's an old, probably Jewish joke that someone said, I was feeling really bad, and he said, cheer up, things could get worse. So I cheered up, and sure as hell they got worse. But, you've got to keep things in perspective.
How do you reach outside the box, though? I mean,
you've got to remember that, when things are bad, they'll get better. Don't get too low. Similarly, when things are that good, just remember something will go wrong. And you know yourself, Lily. Sometimes you wake up and you're just in a bad mood for no good reason, or you're in a good mood. So
how do you get yourself out of a bad mood?
Do stuff. I mean, there's no point wallowing. And the stuff is depending on what's there. One of my great delights, we're very fortunate to have a place at Red Hill, which is 27 acres and largely remnant forest, and we've spent a lot of time clearing it of everything that's not native to the region, to the Mornington Peninsula. It is a spiritual experience walking through, and particularly this past few days, spring is coming, the birds are twittering, the wattles are starting to bloom.
So
you need to get out of yourself. That's the other thing. You're not that important. You really not. It's amazing how you can be the centre of the world. But I've known, and unfortunately there were some very difficult times during the 80s, the crash, and there was nothing else in the world. The world so closed in on me, I couldn't see anything else. I was amazed when, fortunately, we got through all that. All the other things that had happened that I hadn't seen, they didn't exist because I hadn't had my eyes open. So walk around with your eyes open, get out of yourself.
So important, so important. Michael, this is a serious question. Why do you think your wife has stayed with you for 49 years? Well,
one of the great things that's happened to me over many years is to have met some wonderful people, heard great stories, and learnt from amazing people. As a fund manager in Sydney, I know very, very well who has for many years gone to the Warren Buffett, the Berkshire Hathaway annual meeting in Nebraska, the Oracle of Omaha, and he got to know Charlie Munger, who's Warren Buffett's offsider, very well. He was having lunch with him one day, and he said to Mark, the fellow who I was telling me a story.
Yes.
He said, so are you married, Mark? He said, yes. He said, how long have you been married? He said, well, I guess it's been going all right. Been married for 22 years. He said, oh, that's great. He said, do you know what you need to have in a wife for a long and happy marriage? Do you know what she needs? He said, I guess you're going to tell me. He said, do you think that she's beautiful? It's not that. Do you think that she's got good values? Do you think that she's rich? Do you think that she's a good mother, comes from a good family? He said, you know, none of those things. You know what your wife's got to have if you want to have a long and happy marriage. She's got to have very low expectations. That's the best answer I can give you.
So very quickly, to finish on a good note for you and a high note, what are some of the qualities you really appreciate in your wife?
She is, for the most part, unerringly cheerful and positive. She certainly cares deeply. She, going back on what I just said, very, very focused on the family, very, very concerned about all our well-being and all the things we do, and very, very much, she wants everyone to be happy and to be together, and in essence, many of the same characteristics I've so admired in my mother. I guess that saying about you marry your mother, you marry your father. Very much, very positive, very caring.
Michael, thank you so very, very much. Not nearly enough time. You didn't even touch on your kids, really, or on some